In 1993, we were able to buy our first home making minimum wage and paying a 7.5% interest rate. It wasn't all that difficult either. There were plenty of homes to choose from. We ended up settling for like a cute little 3-bedroom, 2-bath home with like an amazing backyard. Well, fast forward to today, and the Dallas Morning News reports it takes more than 3 full-time minimum wage incomes to afford the typical 1-bedroom rental. You know, many buyers are frustrated. They're just plain shut out of the Dallas housing market. Others have chosen to wait for a housing crash, and instead prices are going up this spring, which makes no sense, you know, since we're sitting at a 6.5% interest rate. So in the span of 30 years, affordability has plummeted in Dallas, and today we're gonna find out why. Well, hello, this is Wendy Pennell, and according to Texas A&M's Research Center, affordability is a real problem in Dallas. They report that the ratio of median home price to family income is at an astonishing 3.99. In 2011, that number was 2.42. So just in the past 12 years, it has gotten that much worse. Well, this is a mel of a hess, as my grandma used to say. We need to figure out why this is happening in order to figure out your game plan, okay, your strategy in the midst of it. And to do that, we're gonna have to go back in time. Okay, what in the world has the government done to get us to this point? Well, in the early 2000s, the US government really took off on a mission to incentivize home ownership, okay? They especially wanted to see it among the lower and middle classes, okay? Though this really wasn't what you could call their goal, they ended up sort of encouraging and enabling really bad loan programs. Okay, subprime mortgages were offered to borrowers with low credit ratings, and this enabled them to buy a home with a low down payment, okay, and that was the goal, right? But it usually meant that they were being gouged with fees. They would end up with a monthly payment that would go up beyond anything they could realistically afford. Political leaders, okay, they glorified home ownership as the American dream, okay, and they created like this push to entice the lower and middle classes to buy homes that they couldn't afford. The government's intervention in the housing market was a decisive factor in increasing the number of subprime loans issued by banks. And again, I don't think you could actually say, you know, that the government wanted these toxic loans out there, okay? But they wanted home ownership, okay? With home ownership being such a huge goal, it was more like they just kind of chose to look the other way. So like, for example, what would happen is you were getting outcries of, hey, these loans are bad, you know, and the government would, you know, dutifully assign a task force to look into it, but then the government official would be met with like seriously stiff resistance. Things like, you know, hey, do you want home ownership or not? Because this is getting us there. And of course, you know, the mandate was home ownership for all, so nothing happened to prevent these toxic loan programs. The underlying problem with subprime mortgages was that they were inherently risky, okay, with borrowers typically having low credit scores and limited means to repay their loans. The housing crisis of 2008, okay, it occurred when these subprime borrowers began defaulting on their payments, okay, leading to widespread foreclosures, plummeting home values, and a global recession. The crisis was so severe that it ultimately wiped out trillions of dollars in wealth. You had all these job losses, bankruptcies, okay, just kinds of like economic hardships, okay? The aftermath of the crisis was literally felt for years. A lot of people found themselves facing short sales, you know, or foreclosures, okay? And you literally had entire neighborhoods that were filled with vacant houses. You know, this whole housing crisis caused new construction builders to either go bankrupt or gun shy. New construction came to a screeching halt, okay? And this is where our undersupply problem began to show up, okay? For several years, you just had no construction. Okay, so are you catching that so far? The government wants homeownership. It's not that that's a bad idea, but the government saw the dangers in the subprime loans and the predatory lending, but they let it slide, right? Because they wanted universal home ownership so badly. What ends up happening is you have this massive recession and a dead halt to new construction. And now, you know, in Dallas, you end up with a supply shortage. The second major issue we saw through this recession is the government using interest rates as a tool to revive the economy. In the 80s, we saw interest rates as high as 17%, okay? In the 90s and the 2000s, mortgage rates averaged between 6 to 8%. In response to the housing recession meltdown, the Fed lowered their targeted rate down near zero, okay, which brought mortgage rates into the 3% range. Okay, now this is a point I really want you to see, all right? The Fed having a targeted rate close to zero is not normal, okay? That is an artificial suppression. Historically, you generally see rates at 6% and higher. But beginning with this Great Recession, okay, which they allowed to happen, and by the way, okay, I am not at all excusing greed and corruption, okay, not even remotely. But still, the government saw it and they chose to look the other way. Okay, so beginning with this event, the government artificially suppressed interest rates, and up until 2022, they've never stopped. Okay, remember, historically, interest rates sit at 6% or higher, all right? Instead, since 2009, we've seen mortgage rates in the 4s. When the government chooses to keep interest rates artificially low as a policy to stimulate economic growth, it's going to fuel a rise in demand for homes, which is going to raise prices. I think about this for a minute, okay? When have we seen home values escalate the fastest? Well, Enrique Martinez Garcia with the Dallas Federal Reserve reports that U.S. house prices appreciated 94.5% from first quarter 2013 to second quarter 2022. Artificially suppressed interest rates. Yeah, that's gonna spur inflation. Remember, okay, a 1% difference, 1% in interest rates is equal to an 11% difference in price. So affordability in Dallas goes out the window just by this artificial suppression in interest rates. Okay, and know what? If you speak with anyone about the housing market, they're gonna comment on how horribly high interest rates are. But are they? No, they're actually not, okay? 6.5% has been the historical norm. But the problem is we've gotten so used to the artificial suppression of interest rates that 6.5% seems astronomical. So here we are in the aftermath of home prices being driven up by these artificially low rates. Oh, and don't forget, you also have an undersupply of housing. So 2 strikes against a decently affordable housing market. Now, a third way you see the government really interfering with negative consequences is on the supply side. Okay, a significant contributor to this whole affordability problem is the government imposing duties and tariffs on raw materials and construction materials used to create homes. One of the primary examples of this is the 20% duty on Canadian lumber imports that the US government implemented. Okay, this policy has had a direct impact on the cost of building new homes, right? Because softwood lumber, okay, think about it, that's one of the most commonly used materials in the construction industry. The implementation of this duty has inflated lumber prices, adding to the already high cost of building a home. Now, another significant factor is the steel and aluminum tariffs, okay? These have caused increased prices for construction materials and again, just driving up the production cost of new homes. So with prices increasing, builders have no choice but to pass the expenses onto their customers, those prospective home buyers, right, who are struggling to afford decent, affordable homes. You know, so the government imposing these duties and tariffs on raw materials, you know, and construction materials is hampering the ability of builders to construct homes that are both affordable and of high quality, right? And this in turn, right, we see this, it's led to increasing home prices, making homes more inaccessible and unaffordable. Tiana Lowe Dosha reports that the National Association of Home Builders estimates that government regulations account for 25% of the cost of new home building. So we have a housing shortage thanks to the Great Recession. We have high home prices thanks to artificially suppressed interest rates, and we have new construction that really could be more affordable if there were less duties and tariffs. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if the government learned its lesson and stopped interfering with the housing market? But no, apparently having not learned their lesson in 2008, the government is stepping back into their role of really wanting that, you know, universally extended home ownership. The Washington Examiner reports that beginning in May, the Federal Housing Finance Agency will make prospective buyers with good to great credit scores pay more to fund reduced interest rates for those with bad credit scores. As Michael Lee explains, those fees would be designed to help alleviate the risk of lending to riskier borrowers. Okay, so with this new rule, some buyers with good credit will pay more fees in order for buyers with poor credit to pay less fees. Here we are in Dallas, right? We have a home supply shortage, and we have the government saying, we want everyone to own a home. Why would they do this? Well, as Ingrid Jacques explains, the new fees are tied to a bigger plan from the housing agency to offer equitable access to home ownership. And Vanessa Perry states, the FHFA has taken a number of steps to increase opportunities for home ownership for low and moderate income borrowers. Now, I have to ask you, is this sounding kind of familiar to the early 2000s? Well, yes, okay, we're not the only ones seeing it. Michael Lee comments that this latest rule spawned memories of the 2008 financial crisis that was ignited in large part by the collapse of subprime mortgages. He goes on to point out plans to expand the ability of lower income borrowers to qualify for mortgages have been tried before. Ingrid Jacques points out it's risky to incentivize those who can't afford a home loan to take one. Just look at what happened in 2008 with the mortgage meltdown. And James Bovard, okay, has perhaps the most compelling insight, okay? He says the latest salvation scheme ignores the sordid history of federal policymakers ravaging homeowners they promised to rescue. Senator Marco Rubio definitely did not mince words, okay? He said the fact that a proposal flaunting credit risk is being openly pushed by FHFA just a decade and a half after the housing-led 2008 financial crisis is staggering. Well, I think there's been a general outrage over this idea of what some have called mortgage socialism. But there are plenty of people seeing a far greater concern when it comes to what this could do to the housing market. Senator Rubio says this policy demonstrates a profound misunderstanding of the necessity of accurately tailoring housing finance products to credit risk. In 2008, assessing credit risk was a huge contributor to the mortgage meltdown. You had high-risk mortgages bundled in with lower-risk mortgages, and no one knew what they were investing in. Richard Stern explains that what credit scores are there for is to make a realistic assessment of people's ability to take out credit and make good on the loan. He continues, it is utterly crucial for the entire financial system that be as accurate as possible. Stern describes how it will make it artificially seem as if people who have lower credit ratings are more credit worthy, while those with higher ratings will look like they're less credit worthy. Stern continues, that is exactly what happened when it turned into the subprime mortgage crisis. He concludes, it's creating a system where you can't rely on the risk numbers. You can't make any real predictions about what's going on. Now, obviously, if you're considering buying a home, obviously it's essential to understand the current state of the housing market, okay? For example, here in Dallas, the artificially suppressed interest rates caused home prices to rise 94% over the past decade. And now that rates are at 6%, we would anticipate prices coming down. Okay, instead, we have reinforced demand from people moving into the area and not enough new construction supply. Okay, so those two things combined are kind of like providing like a platform, like a floor, okay? And it's keeping home prices from going down. And now into this housing market landscape, right, we have the government adjusting fees, which will allow more buyers to enter the market. Okay, now the way it has generally worked is buyers with shaky credit will have a higher interest rate and higher fees. And that's because they are more of a credit risk. And a lot of times that means they can't afford to buy. But the government really wants them to be able to buy. So they're making it less expensive for buyers with lower credit to buy a home. So ultimately, this change is going to bring more buyers into the Dallas housing market. So from a strategic standpoint, if you've been holding off, waiting for home prices to drop, you need to know that this is a strike against that. We want to see home prices come down. We want to see a more affordable Dallas. But right now there is just a supply and demand floor that's preventing that from happening. Now, that's not to say there aren't any affordable homes in Dallas, okay? In fact, we did an entire video on affordable new construction that you can watch right here. In the meantime, Wendy out.